Larry, the film gets at a subject which today we're facing in higher ed, which is these concepts of disruption. You hear phrases like flipping the classroom, that the model is broken. You were involved with higher ed and the bringing of young people to it long before these phrases became catchphrases. Can you just give us some of your take on the current state of higher ed and what you think needs to happen in order to make it more accessible and something that all people can aspire to?
Well, it isn't just higher ed, it's education in general in the United States, and I guess a single word would be describing it would be a mess. People have really not thought clearly at all about education. We're sort of running off in all directions all at the same time. The larger questions do not seem to be addressed at this time. Questions towards what end, for what purpose, why are we doing this? Everybody's busy running around trying to put their fingers in the holes in the dike because it's clear there are incredible difficulties in terms of both higher and lower education today. But everybody's being in a state of panic and trying to look for short-term solutions, don't realize that the longer-term issues have to first be addressed.
And of course, the film Walk Right In asks one of the biggest questions: who is it for?
Yeah.
Because the film talks about how bringing these people together from disparate backgrounds changes fundamentally their view of what education is.
Yeah, and again, you know, this incredible disparity of wealth and power in this country today is being reflected all too accurately in terms of access to higher education. In a sense, things were better back in the 60s than they are today.
In what sense?
In the sense that fewer
access.
Access. I mean, you know, if you're
strict cost.
If you're a poor kid, a kid of color, trying to access higher education today, your choices, your options are really incredibly limited. I mean, the costs of higher education have soared through the roof, and this notion of just giving higher scholarship aid to students just doesn't really cut it.
You're talking about this concept that is being advanced now that we are facing as well here in Washington State, which is the high tuition, high aid model.
Right, and even if you do receive aid, look what remains. My grandson, for example, has been accepted at American University in Washington, D.C. Okay. The costs there are about $45,000 a year. Well, he's gotten an $18,000 merit scholarship. Well, that's wonderful, $18,000. But who's going to pick up the remaining tab? How is he going to do this? If you're a student of color, if you come from an underprivileged background, how do you make do? Student loans. So you're going to be saddled with student loans for the rest of your life. This is an incredible problem, not only personally for students, but nationally, that we're going to be facing down the road.
Well, you know, and that gets to the pressures on higher ed about what is being taught. And in Walk Right In, you're talking about bringing high school kids to a university setting, and you're also talking about tough subjects here. You're not just teaching them accounting or mathematics. I mean, those things go without saying. You're dealing with an area that, you know, even today as we speak right now, highly controversial stuff. Should it even be taught? Shouldn't universities just be a place where you get a job training degree and get out there? And should the human beings evolution in this factor at all?
Yeah, this is really a serious issue. Our universities, not only our colleges, but also our high schools, going to be nothing more than really trade schools of sorts. Whatever happened to the concept of a liberal arts education? Whatever happened to questions about human values, the values that inform our actions? Whatever happened, where does philosophy, where do the arts really figure into the scheme of things? Are these merely stops on the way to a trade, or are they something more profound that really shine lights on various aspects of the human condition, who we are as human beings? If we want better human beings, we want more sensitive, caring, loving, compassionate beings, do we want a more loving, sensitive, compassionate, caring society, then our education has to reflect that as well. And we have to see our educational system as something more than just a utilitarian function.
You know, it's ironic because as an educator myself, I read a lot of data on this, and we consistently get reports from CEOs and people who hire across the country that they by a vast majority, up to 90%, say, look, I don't care what the kid's degree is. I want to know that they're a critical thinker, that they have empathy for other human beings, that they can problem solve, and they're creative. And that's the irony, is that there's a lot of pressure to say, no, just train the kid in a trade, but yet people out there saying, give me a whole human being.
Yeah, and the people who are most successful in today's world, okay, are not people with a high academic IQ, but people who have a high emotional IQ. And we found that people who really understand themselves better, but are able to relate to themselves, to the world around them, to other human beings, also are the ones who are actually most successful. It isn't a matter of just building a better mousetrap.
Yeah. Let's shift over to yourself now as a filmmaker. Before we shot the show, you and I had a chance to talk about a couple of other subjects you've dealt with. I was particularly interested in your own personal journey in your family's history, about your grandmother. After making this film now, let's talk about Larry Paros, the filmmaker, and what's coming up and what's happening for you.
Yeah, I don't know about Larry Paros, the filmmaker.
Okay.
I know something about Larry Paros. I always have a difficult task trying to attach myself to a particular role. And I like to think that I'm greater than the various roles that I play.
Okay.
So it sounds nice. That has a nice ring to it, Larry Paros, the filmmaker. Essentially, I follow my heart. I do the things that mean most to me, that are most important to me. I did the film primarily because I wanted to recognize, I really wanted to pay honor to something very special that occurred, and also because I felt it would shine a light on a darker area of educational reform where people really don't understand what that process entails. I wanted them to see what happens to people who undergo a particular educational approach, what happens to them years later.
Yes.
You know, we like to talk about education having an impact on people, and it was really an incredible experience to see them at age 16, hear about the program that they encountered, and then to look at them 40 years later, 50 years later, what impact did that have on their life,
well,
on their
and as
thinking?
we saw in the film, it had a profound impact. I mean, they were fundamentally changed as human beings.
But see, for me, you know, again, that was what impelled me to get into film. Also, I have a love of film.
Yeah.
I love film. I'm just a film junkie. And I had done a film earlier called The Journey, based on my mother's trip to the United States, coming here as an immigrant from the Ukraine, from a small town outside of Odessa near the Black Sea. And it was a good training ground in a sense that I learned about filmmaking. But I also, just having watched hundreds and hundreds of films in my lifetime and being a film junkie, I essentially had an intuitive sense about filmmaking, even though I had never taken a formal course in doing so. So I guess I feel I'm a filmmaker as I am sort of an educator, and as I am also a writer. I am all those things and none of those things. I'd love to continue doing some work in filmmaking. I'm working on an animated film now, simply because animation intrigues me.
Well, that was what I was going to ask. I was going to put you on the spot and say, okay, Larry, given all that, I walk in the door and I say, Larry, I want to commission you to do a film right now. Tell me what it is.
Yeah. But this one, again, came out of left field.
Okay.
It came out of other work that I'm doing, which is etymology. I'm interested in words, word origins, phrases, and the extent to which they convey a sense of who we are as human beings. The words we use, how we express ourselves, tell us something about ourselves. And so, again, this is sort of a strange digression from education, but I'm interested in sexual language, how we express ourselves sexually, the words, the expressions we use. And I've created an animated film essentially animating our use of language in terms of how we approach sexuality. It's just something that intrigues me about human nature, about the human condition. It's something that I feel needs to be done, and also appeals to the comic in me, because I enjoy having a good time. And I think people should be able to approach the subject of sexuality with some degree of dignity, that could be done in an exquisite fashion, not in a gross fashion. Not to be frightened by it. I give people permission to talk and think about something they ordinarily can't express. And so that appeals to me. So that's a project, but the major project, once that is concluded, I'll be turning 80 in February, is I promised myself I would do the work on education, the book on education.
Great.
And the Yale Summer High School film will be a part of that.
Absolutely.
But what I hope to do is to integrate the experience of the 60s, The experience of the 70s, when I was involved in alternative education and creating alternative schools out of old bowling alleys and working with the community, working with poverty kids in that context, with the technology today. And how do we blend those three dimensions together in creating a more humane and more responsive educational system for all children?
Fantastic. Well, we wish you best of luck, and we look forward to having you back here again, because these sound like fascinating projects. Larry, thank you so much for being here on Backstory, and thank you for watching Backstory. I'm Andrew Tsao, and I will see you again behind the scenes.